Depending on if you're replacing an old wood fireplace mantle or installing a new fireplace mantle, the dimensions that you will need to have handy to choose the correct size fireplace mantle are going to vary. I'm Melissa from Northline Express, and in this video I'll discuss which measurements you need to have on hand when purchasing a new wood fireplace mantle, or also which measurements you'll need to have if you're replacing an old fireplace surround. If you're replacing an old or existing fireplace surround, you're going to want to make sure that you gather the following measurements. First, start by gathering your shelf width. You'll do this by measuring the total width of the top of the wood fireplace mantle at the widest part. Now let's gather the shelf depth. You do this by measuring the depth of the wood fireplace mantle from the edge of the front edge of it to the back side of the wall. Now let's gather the total height. Measure the height of the wood fireplace mantle from the top of the hearth or the floor to the bottom of the mantle shelf if you do not have a hearth. Now let's get the total width of your mantle. Measure the entire width of the fireplace surround from end to end. If you don't have a fireplace surround, measure the total width of the facing. Next, let's get your projection depth. Measure the total depth of the side of the fireplace mantle from the outer edge back to the wall. Now we're going to need to gather the opening height of your fireplace. You do this by measuring the height of the fireplace opening from the floor or top of the hearth to the top of the opening. It's time to gather some side distances. Let's do this by measuring the edge of the hearth or surround to the nearest light fixture, window, corner, or door on each side of your fireplace. Now here are the measurements you're going to need if you're installing a new fireplace mantle. Remember, these guidelines are assuming that you have a fireplace facing and a hearth. If you don't have a fireplace facing or a hearth, simply skip those measurements. We're going to start by getting the total facing width, and you do this by measuring the total width of the fireplace facing from end to end. Now let's get just the facing width. Measure the width of the facing on one side of the fireplace opening. Now let's get the facing depth. If your facing projects out from the wall, measure the distance from the outer edge back to your wall. Now let's get the opening width of your fireplace. Measure the width of the fireplace opening. And now let's get the opening height by measuring the height of the opening from the floor of the fireplace or at the hearth if you have one. Now it's time to gather your hearth height. You do this by measuring the height of the hearth from the floor to the top of the surface. Your hearth depth you will gather by measuring the depth of the hearth from the front edge back to your wall. And finally, gather your hearth width by measuring the width of the hearth from end to end. We do need to finally gather some side distances, and you do that by measuring from the edge of the facing to the nearest light fixture, door, corner, or window on each side of your fireplace. And do remember, if you're not replacing an old or existing fireplace mantle, but rather installing a new fireplace surround or mantle, you will need to check with your local building codes or fire safety department to obtain the minimum distance allowed from the fireplace opening to your fireplace surround or mantle. I hope you found this information helpful, but if you have questions about choosing or measuring for a fireplace mantle, you can give us a call at 866-667-8454. At Northline Express, home of the Buy and Try Satisfaction Guarantee, we're always happy to help.